Right now, your heart is going to stop. Not today, hopefully, but it will. And in the seconds after it does, your brain is going to do something it has never done before in your entire life. Here's what almost nobody knows about that moment. It's not a switch. This isn't about disease or trauma or any specific way a person dies. This is the part of dying that's universal, the part every human body goes through, no matter how the story ends. For most of human history, death looked simple. Your heart stops, you're gone, the lights go out all at once, like flipping a breaker. But that's not what the evidence shows. In the minutes after your heart stops, and in some documented cases much longer than minutes, your brain appears to do something it has never done before. Something more intense, more organized, and stranger than almost anything it does while you're alive. So, what is actually happening in there, and why does the end of a human life look less like a shutdown and more like one final massive event? Let's start with how we used to define this moment. For centuries, the test for death was simple: no pulse, no breath. That was it. You were gone. But this test was so unreliable that it terrified people. In the 1700s and 1800s, the fear of being declared dead too early and buried while still alive was so widespread that inventors patented safety coffins. Some had bells attached to ropes that ran down into the casket, so a person who woke up underground could ring for help. Morgues in parts of Europe kept bodies laid out for days, watched by attendants, waiting for any sign of movement before burial. It sounds extreme, but doctors kept running into a real problem. People who had no pulse, no breath, and no detectable signs of life sometimes came back on their own. Doctors even have a name for it: the Lazarus phenomenon. In one documented 2007 case, a 66-year-old man was declared dead after 17 minutes of CPR. 10 minutes after doctors stopped, his pulse came back on its own. He survived and was eventually discharged. As of the most recent count, doctors have logged 76 of these cases across 27 countries. Rare, but consistent enough that it isn't a fluke. Which means no pulse was never as final as it sounded. So scientists started looking somewhere else: the brain. In 2013, a team at the University of Michigan ran an experiment that should have confirmed what everyone expected. They induced cardiac arrest in rats and recorded their brain activity as the heart stopped. The expectation was a slow fade, a gradual dimming, like a screen powering down. That is not what they found. Within seconds of the heart stopping, the rats' brains produced a surge of highly organized electrical activity, specifically gamma waves. Gamma waves are the same high-frequency signals associated with focused attention, memory, and vivid conscious experience while awake. Not weaker than a normal waking brain, stronger. By some measures, these dying brains were briefly more synchronized than they had ever been while alive. The researchers had been expecting an ending. What they found looked more like a final, brief explosion of activity, and it might explain why people who survive near-death events so often describe them as more vivid and more real than ordinary life. But here's what's even stranger. This isn't just something that happens in rats in a lab. In 2014, a researcher named Sam Parnia ran a study across multiple hospitals, tracking patients who went into cardiac arrest and received CPR. The goal was simple: find out what, if anything, people experience during the period when their heart has stopped. About 2% of patients who survived described being aware during the resuscitation itself, not vague impressions. Specific, sometimes verifiable details about conversations, sounds, and actions happening in the room, while their heart was not beating and their brain, by the old definition, should have been completely offline. A follow-up study went even further. In some patients, researchers recorded spikes of brain activity, the kind associated with conscious thought, up to an hour after CPR had begun. An hour after the heart had already stopped. And it's not only the moment of cardiac arrest where something unexpected shows up. Palliative care researchers have spent years documenting what happens in the days before death, in people who aren't in cardiac arrest at all. Many dying patients, completely lucid, report vivid visions of people who have already died, often people they loved. These aren't like the confused hallucinations that come with delirium or medication. Patients describe them as calm, coherent, and often the most meaningful experience of their final days. Researchers studying this still don't have a clean explanation for why it happens or why it follows such a consistent pattern across cultures and belief systems. So, if the brain can still be doing something this organized, this late, what exactly is it doing? And what does the dying brain actually go through step by step? This is where it gets specific. When the heart stops, blood stops moving. Oxygen stops arriving. But brain cells don't switch off the instant oxygen runs out. They start a slower process of shutting down, and not all at once. Some researchers believe hearing may be one of the last senses to go. The auditory system requires very little energy compared to vision, and some studies on dying patients have found the brain still responding to sound long after other responses have faded. Which means, in the final minutes, a person may still be able to hear what's happening around them, even when nothing else seems to be working. Then there's the surge itself. In 2019, the same research group that found the gamma wave surge ran a follow-up. They measured the brain's chemical activity directly and found that levels of DMT, a compound known for triggering intense dreamlike states, spiked in the visual cortex right as cardiac arrest set in. It's a single study, and scientists are still debating how reliably the brain produces DMT at all, let alone what it does in those final seconds. But if the finding holds up, it would line up with something that's been reported for centuries. People who come back from the edge of death often describe the experience not as terrifying, but as peaceful, even euphoric. This is also why doctors who handle organ donation work within strict time windows after the heart stops. Tissue doesn't die the moment the heart does. It dies in stages, and how long each organ can hold on determines whether it can still be used. And the strangest part might be this. Just because the heart stops, and just because the brain goes quiet, doesn't mean the cells inside it are immediately gone. In 2019, researchers at Yale took pig brains 4 hours after death and restored circulation using an artificial system. The cells weren't dead in the way anyone expected. Some of them resumed basic functions. Not consciousness, not memory, but activity, hours after the animal had been declared dead. This result alone set off a debate among bioethicists. If cells can still function hours later, where exactly is the line? Some researchers now talk about death in 3 separate categories. Clinical death is when the heart stops. Biological death is when cells start dying from lack of oxygen, organ by organ, over minutes to hours. And then there's a third category, information theoretic death. The point where the structure that stores your memories and your personality has broken down so completely that nothing could ever bring it back. The unsettling part is that these 3 lines don't happen at the same moment. There can be a real gap between the instant your heart stops and the instant whatever made you you is actually permanently gone. For most of history, we treated death like a door. Open, then shut. One side, then the other. But the evidence keeps pointing somewhere else. A surge of activity stronger than waking life. Awareness that persists after the heart stops. Visions in the final days that researchers still can't fully explain. Hearing that may outlast everything else. Cells that keep working long after the body has been declared gone. Maybe the end of a life isn't a door at all. Maybe it's closer to a wave. Something that builds, peaks, and only then recedes. And if that's true, then somewhere inside every person who has ever died, there may have been one last moment. Loud, brief, organized, and almost certainly never remembered. And for the people standing around you in that room, the ones who think it's already over, there may be a window where it isn't. A window where some part of you is still working, still listening, still running, even as everyone else has already started to grieve. Somewhere, right now, someone's heart is stopping. And for a few seconds longer than anyone in the room realizes, they are still in there. The only question left, the one no monitor can fully answer, is whether, on some level, you'll be there for yours.